Welcome, everybody, to Mind in America. Thank you for joining us today. Our guest is Mr. Greg Huffman, CEO and President and Director of Nuclear Fuels. Welcome, Greg. Greg, thanks for joining us at Mind in America.
Thanks, Janet. My pleasure. Really looking forward to this.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to the conversation, and I know you've got a great story. But first, what are you doing right now?
Right now, I'm sitting at our nuclear fuels office in downtown Toronto. We're located right on Bay Street, so very centrally located in the financial district, not too far from a number of the offices that I've worked at, over my years on both the sell side brokerage firms as well as on the buy side. So yeah, right down in the heart of the business district in Toronto on a nice, cool early winter day.
Awesome. So we're going to get into what you're doing at Nuclear Fuels, but first, for some people don't know you. I don't know who doesn't, but your background.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got a pretty storied and interesting background. I grew up in Ontario, and went to school in Sudbury, Ontario, which is a mining town located about 4 hours north of Toronto. That is really sort of the capital of nickel and copper mining in North America. It's the home of the big nickel and the storied history of Inco and Falconbridge, which have now become Vale and Glencore. So went to school there, lived there for a number of years, working for Falconbridge and then subsequent companies. Really did fall in love with the junior side of the industry as a geologist, and went to consult as a geologist for a number of companies working both in Ontario and around Sudbury as well as in Quebec, and found that very exciting. But did end up moving to Toronto in the early 2000s to pursue a bit of a change in tack from a career perspective, and it was to join a small brokerage firm as a mining analyst. And I didn't really have a lot of capital markets background, but when I was working as a geologist, I always wondered about, particularly for the smaller cap junior companies, I wondered where the money came from. And that sort of drew me into the brokerage side of things. So I accepted a job at a small boutique brokerage firm focused on mining as an analyst. And that was in 2003. And the very first file that company had me look at was uranium. They had a macro thesis on uranium, and that there was a very good setup coming from a price perspective, driven by growing demand and shortage of supply, and that played out incredibly well. And I was one of only a very few number of mining analysts focused on the junior uranium space, and we saw the spot price move during that cycle from $7 in 2003 up over $138 by early 2008. So it was really quite an amazing time to be very active within the space, and got to really be on the forefront of dealing with the number of emerging companies operating around the world, advancing uranium assets, and got to meet a lot of very, very exciting characters and people involved in the space, and really fell in love with not just the brokerage side of the mining industry, but really as uranium as a subsector with that. And my career sort of evolved and went on to work on the buy side for a multi-strat hedge fund out of the US in Milwaukee, moved back to Toronto and worked for one of the big five chartered Canadian banks as a specialty salesperson focused on exploration and development stage companies, always sort of staying close to the uranium sector. And then in 2016, moved to become the global head of mining sales at Canaccord Genuity, which is a very large independent brokerage firm with a global platform, basically coordinating the mining practice there around the world. So it was something that I was very excited to be doing, and very passionate about, and we grew the business there quite substantially. And yeah, that took us up until coming up on a year ago when the opportunity with nuclear fuels came to fruition for me.
So, and I met you at Canaccord for the first time, I believe.
Yes.
But you met Bill Sheriff back during that '04 era. But he tells a story about meeting you at a conference.
Yes, yeah, and so Bill was one of those companies that when I was a young uranium analyst, sort of trying to figure out the space. Bill was one, basically had a predecessor company to Nuclear Fuels and to Encore, a parent company called Energy Metals Corp, or ticker was EMC as it was commonly known. And so Bill was running Energy Metals and basically traveling around the U.S. acquiring uranium assets in various jurisdictions within the U.S., some past producing, some with historical resources. And I was really fascinated to meet Bill, and we actually ran into each other at one of the early 2004 uranium conferences that was really sort of more of an industry conference rather than more of an investor style conference. And really, I think we were the only two people there who were not fuel buyers, and everyone seemed to know each other in the nuclear space. And then Bill and I were standing there as two geologists in the corner, and we ended up talking because we thought we'd sort of see what each other was doing, and it really sparked a very very solid and productive long-term relationship. I was able to help raise some of the early financing dollars for Energy Metals, and follow the company as it evolved and morphed through a number of corporate transactions, a number of property deals, up until its eventual sale to Uranium One, a very large multinational uranium-focused company, which is an incredible success for all the shareholders who were involved through that path. And Bill and I have stayed in touch ever since. Afterwards, he went on to start up Encore Energy, which was the encore to Energy Metals, and with a very similar strategy of sort of focused on sort of acquiring and advancing U.S. assets. And I was an early investor in that. I'm still a very really significant shareholder of Encore and followed Bill's progress. And obviously there was a very it was probably a little bit of a more prolonged evolution of the company because Fukushima happened sort of not long after the company came to fruition. But I really think that was a bit of an opportunity, and Bill's very good at identifying those opportunities because it gave him basically a runway to build out the portfolio without a lot of competition for Encore. And really, as things progressed, Encore grew and evolved and eventually morphed in the company that it is today, which is really one of the leading uranium producing companies out there, with two assets, ISR operations in Texas, that are now up and running.
And assets were spun out. They hold a large position in nuclear fuels now.
Yeah, so and it's a really quite a cool story in terms of the how Nuclear Fuels came to be. As Bill was advancing the Encore Energy portfolio and made the decision to basically pivot towards being a producer of uranium and acquiring the assets and the team that would make that transition happen. Really, there was a number of earlier stage but very prospective properties within the Encore portfolio that probably weren't going to get as much attention, from exploration effort, from investment dollars required, from the technical staff that needed to be focused on them. They really, they weren't within Encore being laser focused on getting both the Rosita and Alta Mesa back into production in Texas. Some of those other very prospective properties just weren't going to get the attention. So the decision was made corporately to take those and put them into a separate entity, separately listed, separately financed, separately managed entity, where they could be advanced in parallel. But also where Encore would have a lot of sort of an ongoing relationship with that company on a couple different levels. You mentioned the equity holding. Encore has a 19.9% equity interest in Nuclear Fuels on a partially diluted basis. That's the maximum that they're allowed to have under the current rules. So that's there's a very good relationship there. They also have the right to appoint two directors to our board, which they've exercised. Bill is one of those two directors, as well as being our non-executive chairman. And then we also have a relationship at the asset level where we own the properties that were spun into Nuclear Fuels outright on a 100% basis. But on the flagship Casey project, they do have a back-in right where they can reacquire a 51% interest under certain conditions that would allow them to regain operatorship and advance that asset through to production. But it's actually a very attractive, and this is something I spent quite a bit of time on before joining. I think it's, we see a lot of these deals where, the junior company comes up on the short end of the stick, but I think this one is very, very advantageous to both Nuclear Fuels as well as to Encore as the parent company, in that if we are able to achieve that hurdle from a resource perspective, where Encore decides to back in for that 51% interest, Nuclear Fuels would get paid 2.5 times the exploration expenditures to that point, in addition to having Encore put up a 100% of the capex to advance the asset into production. So with our Nuclear Fuels 49% share of that, repaid out of cash flow. So it's a very well structured back-in agreement from a Nuclear Fuels perspective, and something that I've had lots of very public and positive commentary from investors on.
Yeah, yeah. So uh, an exit strategy for a junior company that doesn't have the necessary talent to focus on the production side, and gives you the resources to go and continue exploration and focus on the next project, correct?
It really is a win-win scenario on this.
Yeah.
We're able to advance the asset and do the exploration work to build that resource up, and then really, Encore has the opportunity to come back in and really, build on
Bring that talent back,
their
right?
talents.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the team that's done it before, not once but twice, at Encore, and a number of times prior in previous companies, prior to Encore, and could do it again with the Casey project within Nuclear Fuels.
So I want to ask you a couple of questions. I'm going to start with these, but what was it about junior companies that appealed to you?
Yeah, and for me, it's really the entrepreneurial nature. Like, as I mentioned, I'm a geologist, and I've always focused on exploration. And even when I was working as a mining analyst, or as an institutional equity salesperson focused on mining, it was really the most value creation that you see within the mining cycle is related to discovery. It's really that first part of that Lassonde curve that everybody talks about. That's really where you see the explosive shareholder returns on that discovery. And if you layer that in a commodity setting where the commodity price is doing well, really it's almost unparalleled in terms of returns that you can see from a shareholder perspective, not just within mining, but across other sectors as well. So that's always been something for me that it's really where we drive the most value creation within the mining space, is that discovery stage. And so that's always been something that I've been focused on. And I've been on the institutional equity side of things for over 20 years prior to joining Nuclear Fuels. And I've seen it time and time again, where it's that discovery hole, it's that excitement around how big is this going to get, what are the hurdles to advance it towards production. And then eventually, if it's a good enough discovery, most of these companies get taken out for that discovery. So you've got a couple of ways for the company to win. So that's really, for me, what excites me about Nuclear Fuels. And not only do you have the potential for new discovery, that new discovery is coming in a jurisdiction, being in the US, where you have incredible support at all levels of government for advancement and reestablishment of the nuclear fuel cycle. And then you're within Wyoming, which is geologically incredibly well endowed. We've got a number of ISR uranium operations that are currently being restarted, right in our vicinity of the Powder River Basin. And really, what we're looking is to have offer shareholders that potential for great returns on the back of new discoveries on the Casey project.
So the other night I was watching we have common ground. That my dad lived in Sudbury for many, many years. You're up there. I don't know if you've seen, there's a fabulous series on Timmins and the gold boom of Timmins. Have you seen it?
Yes, I have.
It so simply explains, and we're going to try and find a link and put it up on the podcast if people haven't seen it, but it so simply explains how the mines of the North built the whole financial industry in Toronto, and what it contributed to the economy and to the development of Canada and the stock exchange. It was fabulous. So I'm glad you've seen it, because my big thing is I love what the mineral extraction industry does to build communities and to build jobs and to build wealth and to build
countries, right? To build economies. My question for you is why did you pick nuclear fuels? Because I'm sure when you were at Canaccord, you had exposure to mid-tier producers. Like why nuclear fuels?
Yeah, and it was really interesting when Bill approached me about the opportunity. It was something where I was very happy and wasn't looking to leave Canaccord at all. You know, we had a great team in place. Felt the cycle was just about to really turn on from you know an investment perspective in the mining industry, particularly at the junior end of the scale. It had been quiet for a number of years, and I've seen enough of these cycles that it doesn't stay, you know, can stay quiet for a while, but it always does turn. And really, you know, Bill approached me about nuclear fuels, and my initial reaction was, well, Bill, it's quite a, you know, thank you, it's an honor, but you know, it's quite a small company. You know, really, you know, there's a question of I was always going to move back to the corporate side. It was a question of when, not if, but you know, I sort of had 3 to 5 years, you know, sort of in my head. And I had a bigger company would be the one that I joined, perhaps in a corporate development style role. And Bill's like, well, I think, you know, you take a look at this in a bit more detail. So we went away and you know, I spent some time. And really what got me is the fact that nuclear fuels was an opportunity that ticked every single box for me, except for that timeline that I had in my head about my own career development. It was in the right commodity, being uranium. I definitely wanted to do something in uranium. I love gold. You know, but there's a lot of gold companies out there. I love copper, but it's very hard to find copper assets. So really, and I've got a background in uranium, so it was something that I thought that I could have a bit of a strategic advantage of. So it was the right commodity. Then it was in the right jurisdiction. I really think, you know, you look back at the US has been self-sufficient at points in the 70s and 80s from a uranium production perspective, producing up to 40 million pounds a year. Um, and at the when the conditions are right from a price perspective. So geologically, the US has the uranium, it just needs the price environment. And we're seeing that now. So, you know, that was definitely. And then within the US, you know, from a permitting perspective, it was really important for me to be at a company where we had the potential geologically to make a discovery, and then we could advance that discovery through to production in a timely fashion. And really that brings us to the agreement states within the US. And the agreement states, you know, as I'm sure many of our viewers are aware, are you know, where the state government has an agreement with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to basically do the permitting for anything nuclear related at the state level, which greatly accelerates things from a permitting perspective. So Wyoming's one of those states. So to see that nuclear fuels is the bulk of the portfolio was focused in Wyoming. And then, you know, at the specific asset level, the properties themselves, you know, particularly Casey, I was intrigued by Casey because I had spent so much time on the US uranium space last cycle, 2003 to 2008, but I couldn't remember Casey. So I asked Bill, who had this? And he's like, you know, because I don't remember anyone actually doing any work on it or it being, you know, sort of, you know, highlighted as a property of merit for any companies. And he's like, Greg, it was never consolidated last cycle, so it didn't see any work. And to this date, we haven't been able to find any holes that were drilled last cycle on the Casey project. So really, it's a property that missed what was a phenomenal uranium cycle was sort of hidden away from investors. So that said, there's been a lot of work done on it back in the 80s. So we're able to stand on the work that's been done on the 80s and really use that to help advance and you know see the potential for adding new resources that can be exploited in a very supportive permitting regime jurisdiction in a timely fashion. So for me, it was almost too good of an opportunity to pass up. And finally, probably one of the most important things is Bill was very supportive of me taking a material equity stake in the company through a private placement when I joined. You know, it was something where I've always been alignment with shareholders for me as an institutional salesperson between management and those shareholders was paramount. You wanted to see management put their money where their mouth is, and not just from an options perspective, but actually, you know, write checks into companies. And so that was something that was very important. Bill was incredibly supportive of that. So when I joined, I put a material amount of my net worth into the company in an equity private placement. Just to make sure that there was that very good alignment from day one with the shareholder base, and you know, continue to see this as being my largest position on a go-forward basis as long as I'm with the company.
And I see you just did that again with your latest addition to the board too.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, obviously there's a very strong board and we can get into it, but, you know, we did have some board evolution work, after I joined it, we were able to, you know, really, you know, it was a coup to get Bram Spilvogel, one of my longest term institutional mining clients, who is the co-portfolio manager for the last 20 years at RBC Asset Management, running both their precious metals as well as their mining fund, which are the large, the precious metals are the largest in Canada. So Bram's been an incredible client of mine, probably one of my toughest clients. In terms of the level of rigor and detail that he would go into. He recently retired from RBC in the spring, and after I joined on at Nuclear Fuels, we chatted about him potentially coming on as a board member, and he was Greg, I'm going to be very selective. I'm going to do my work, and I'm only joining one small cap board and one larger cap board of the mining space. So work through the work, the due diligence with Bram, and he decided to join on. And similar to me, he did say, I want to have alignment with shareholders, and did a private placement upon his joining as well. And on a recent financing, both of us did participate on that as well. So to signal as a signal to further alignment.
So there's two other things I want to cover today. And I guess first we'll go with stay on the nuclear fuels. What does the next year or so look like for nuclear fuels?
Yeah, and we're really excited about the next year. So when I joined on, the company had a drill program put in place, and really, I think we did a good job of first of all, confirming the historical work that was done on the property in the 70s and 80s. Like I said, there's nothing done in the early 2000 cycle. So we did want to go back and make sure that, the historical work had been done well, and that the uranium mineralization, including the historical resource estimate, that had been completed on certain mineralized zones on the property, was accurate and representative. And that's been done. But the other key thing that we wanted to do as part of the program is test to see whether or not those historical zones of mineralization had upside potential, or had they been fully delineated. So, we were, doing the confirmation drilling, infill, but then we're doing step out along trend. We'd try to expand and extend those zones of mineralization. And in each one of the zones that we tested, we were able to successfully do that. So for me, that was a hugely positive signal. That was basically a sign that, in the 70s and 80s, the work was done well, but it wasn't done completely. And really, you can tie that back to basically a downfall in sort of the uranium exploration development cycle within the US in the early 80s. They didn't stop because they ran out of mineralization. Really, they stopped because exploration funding dried up on the back of the 3 Mile Island. So for us, that was really important to define that there was upside geologically beyond the historical resources. The other exciting part of the drill program over the past year is looking for new deposits on the property. So for us to get to that hurdle rate with Encore, we really think that not only are we going to expand and extend the historical resources, but we're going to have the opportunity to make those new discoveries. So we're able to stand on the historical work, as well as not just for uranium, but for oil and gas related drilling that's been done on the property. Okay. Use that geological information and really go out there, look for new discoveries. So we're really excited to continue on that over the 2025 drill program. We've just completed a raise for almost $14 million Canadian, so we're very well financed to move forward and really grow that resource base beyond what's been established historically, both by extending and expanding those historical zones, as well as making new discoveries. So we're really excited about that for 2025.
And then the other question I want to ask is where do you see the industry now, and where do you see the industry going? And by the industry, I mean nuclear. There's been so many developments globally, in the United States, the uranium space. What's your take on the whole thing?
Yeah, like and I had a thesis on the sector when I joined on. I was considering joining on at Nuclear Fuels. I thought that this is going to be a phenomenal thematic story in the more broad market in 3 to 4 years time. This is really going to play it. And what happened, instead of 3 to 4 years, it was really 3 to 4 months after I joined. This really started to play out. As you had, you could see the sentiment shifting in the favor of nuclear for the last couple of years, but really just the massive amount of positive developments that we've seen, both from an energy perspective related to AI, as well as from Bitcoin, the positive sort of impact that the Trump presidency is going to have on Bitcoin and sort of the energy draw related to that. really nuclear has come to the forefront much quicker than even I had anticipated as the go-to source for clean, green, 24/7 energy. And that's really, combine that with really supply curtailments right across the nuclear fuel cycle related to geopolitical events. And we can talk about, sort of the ban on Russian material, the Russian embargo against, sending any material to the US. We can talk about Niger and, Orano losing their mines there. So, you know what, there's just right across the board, the U.S. is going to look to reestablish that nuclear fuel supply chain, and we're really excited to see the work that's being done on the conversion and the enrichment side domestically within the U.S. But the great part is, geologically, as I mentioned earlier, the U.S. can supply its own uranium right from the production perspective, and we're seeing that with Encore, operations in Texas. We're seeing that with the restart of other ISR operations in the state of Wyoming, and really what we're super excited about is to be that go-to U.S. story for new discoveries within the U.S. So for me, it's like, I think it's an incredibly exciting time. I think there's a real window because we've seen the larger cap companies within the uranium space really, perform well on this macro thesis, and generalist investors coming in and buying the chemicals of the world, as well as some of the nuclear power providers. But really what we haven't seen is that go, downscale and downstream into the earlier stage exploration and development companies. So we see there's a real opportunity right now for investment return.
So I understand that 04 to 06 there was a supply interruption, and so it was supply side driven. And then as this was developing, it was a demand driven model, which changes everything. Is there also a supply shortage issue with the global tensions about sourcing uranium? Do you see
Absolutely, yeah.
that?
I think we've got, both sides of the equation here are very favorable for uranium. As you mentioned, like the demand side is almost unprecedented. Not only are we seeing extensions of reactors, which wasn't built into the models, we've got the new builds in China, which are continuing to be added to. We've got new builds elsewhere being announced, and we've got, the basically the small modular reactor factor coming online as well, with a huge amount of investment dollars going into that. So none of which are really factored into a lot of the demand side equations. From that perspective, we've also got countries that have previously been turning off reactors, doing U-turns. Look at Germany; you've turned off a reactor. Now there's talk about restarting. So that supply side is really, or the demand side is really coming together even better than people demand. Now the supply side, as you mentioned, like that was really what drove that 2003 to 2008 cycle. And it was related to the Saskatchewan mines that had water inflow issues, which really scared the nuclear fuel buyers into the market, and you had a lot of investment fund participation in the market as well. This time, with the higher prices, we saw a supply response out of Kazakhstan. This time, even at higher prices, we don't have a Kazakhstan to come online. There's nowhere that really can flip the switch and ramp up uranium production in a meaningful way, to the extent that's going to be required. So, and in fact, even out of speaking of Kazakhstan, like that's really, it's the largest producer in the world. They use ISR, but they do it with, sulfuric acid, and there's a massive shortage within the country and a real bottleneck in terms of bringing on new sulfuric acid supply, which really we're already starting to see curtail some of the production. And lo and behold, it's really the what production is being curtailed out of Kazakhstan. It's the material that's intended to go west towards the U.S. And what we're seeing is basically preferential sulfuric acid supply go to those operations that are supplying uranium into both Russia and to China. So we really think that there's this bifurcation of uranium pricing is going to happen between the East and the West, which is going to be hugely positive for anyone who's able to, be working in terms of bringing new uranium production to the market in the West.
Okay, one last question. Actually two, then I'll let you go. Your thoughts on the only real measure for the market on uranium is spot price, which has its challenges. So any thoughts on spot price right now?
Yeah, for sure. And it's a really interesting dynamic because, as I said, I've followed the space for over 20 years, and, it's a blessing and a curse, the spot price, because it's become much more visible visibly reported over the years. And, it used to be once a week, then it became the futures price. And now it's, daily reported by a couple different trade organizations. And really particularly the smaller cap uranium equities are absolutely tied to the daily movements on the spot price. That's really become sort of a blessing and a curse because, the spot price, as you mentioned, is not really a very accurate representation of the uranium market because such a small component of the overall market is traded on the spot. The majority of it is traded is transacted as part of long-term contracting, and the long-term price, first of all, is only reported once a month. Second of all, is also not very accurate representation of the current state of the market just because of the price reporting mechanism. So really, we're seeing some phenomenal movements in terms of contracting, basically, higher floors, higher ceilings or no ceilings being talked about in place of new contracts coming on board. That's a reflective of the utilities starting to get concerned, but that's really not, being reflected yet in the spot market on a short-term basis because overall people are well supplied in the short term. So, but we really think that, with the challenges that a number of these companies, be it Kazatomprom in Kazakhstan or some of the other producers that are ramping up and already have contracts in place, we do think that it's just a matter of time until we see some of the producers have to enter the spot market in order to fill their contracted supply. So it's something where there's a real window of opportunity while the spot market is a little bit sloppy for investors to get equities at a very, very attractive price. And I think it's going to be a phenomenal upside on both the spot as well as the term price over the course of 2025.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, my last question's easy. My last question is, you said that you grew up in Sudbury, decided to study geology. Why this sector when you were coming out of school? Because, and the reason I always ask people this, I love to hear how they got into it. What were the choices? Is so there are labor shortage issues in this space because of a 40-year gap. So what drove you here?
Yeah, for me, I was one of those kids going around picking up rocks on the beach and saying I wanted to be a geologist. All my friends are like, "What's a geologist?" It's been a lifelong passion of mine. I did grow up actually in Southern Ontario, and when I was looking at schools to go to for university, all my friends were going to some of the big name schools in Southern Ontario. And I chose to go to Laurentian and Sudbury. And really, why was that? It was because I said I wanted to study geology, and if I wanted to study geology and then get a job related to mining, there's got to be mines around. So really, that's what brought me to study at Laurentian University in Sudbury, and we really has one of the top geological programs in Canada. And it was phenomenal. I had a job my first year, first summer right out of university, and never went back to Southern Ontario afterwards for work during university, and subsequently it was a phenomenal experience and able to get great job opportunities, a lot of varied experiences, always within the mining industry. And, as mentioned, I still have a place in Sudbury. I spend a lot of time up there. I'm still very involved with Laurentian University as an advisory board member on the Goodman School of Mines. And, that's, part of my passion is about, trying to encourage the next generation of geologists, of mining engineers, of chemical engineers, of metallurgists, of process engineers. We really have to do a lot more as an industry to encourage that. And my participation as an advisory board member of the Goodman School of Mines is part of that, and something I'm very passionate about. And also, as part of our work with the Encore Educational Society, something that as a group within Encore group of companies, we're very passionate about trying to encourage the next wave of uranium geologists, the uranium wellfield engineers. We really need to build that out because it's going to be a long-term secular movement where we're going to need that, and really the bottleneck's going to move towards that very, very quickly. So something I'm very passionate, very excited about to be a part of the group.
Well, thanks, Greg. And apologies for saying you grew up in Sudbury when you grew up in Southern Ontario. I knew that.
All good, all good. A lot of people. I'm so passionate about Sudbury. Everyone thinks I actually grew up there, but yeah, it's my adopted home.
That's wonderful. Well, thanks for joining us today. I think we've covered a lot of ground. I love the story, obviously. Been involved for a long time. And let's do this again.
Absolutely. Would love to get into some of the more details on the back of ongoing drill results from Casey and talk about some of the exciting other projects within the portfolio that we're going to be working on over the course of 2025.
Yeah, no, that'd be wonderful. We'll have a great day, and we look forward to the next time we talk. And thanks everybody for listening. Thanks, Ray.
Thank you. Appreciate it.